The observation deck of the Galactic Academy's Xenobiology wing buzzed with confusion. Through the reinforced viewing panel, Instructor Velth's four eyes blinked in a synchronous bewilderment as they watched the scene unfold in the human habitat below. This violates every protocol we established. Velth chittered, their mandibles clicking nervously. The Krovar cubs are bringing sustenance to the human. Why would they do this? Mira sat cross-legged on the floor of her assigned quarters, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as two juvenile Krovars, each the size of a large dog, covered in silvery fur with 6 limbs and curious golden eyes, carefully deposited chunks of their protein rations onto the plate before her. The cubs chirped excitedly, their tails swishing with obvious pride. "Fascinating," murmured Instructor Wren, the Valorian scholar whose translucent form shimmered with analytical interest. "In 3 cycles of observation, no species has elicited this behavior from Krovar juveniles. They are notoriously food-aggressive at this developmental stage." Velth consulted their datapad, scrolling through weeks of notes. The human, Mira, specimen designation HU287, has been in proximity to the cubs for only 12 solar rotations. How has she achieved this? What the instructors couldn't understand through their sterile observations and carefully controlled experiments, was the language that existed beyond words and treaties. Mira had learned it young, growing up on the frontier colonies where survival meant reading the unspoken signals of alien wildlife and harsh environments alike. On her 3rd day in the habitat, Mira had noticed the cubs watching her eat. While the adult Krovars ignored her completely, as the instructors had predicted, the juveniles observed with intense curiosity. She had held out a piece of her ration bar, not expecting them to take it, simply offering. They had fled, of course, but they had watched from a distance. The next day she did it again. And the next, never forcing, never approaching them, just offering, then returning to her meal when they refused. By the 7th day, the bolder of the 2 cubs, the one Mira privately called Kale, though she knew the instructors would disapprove of her naming them, had crept close enough to sniff her outstretched hand. Not the food. Her hand. That was when Mira understood something the instructors, for all their degrees and research, had missed entirely. The cubs weren't afraid of her. They were afraid of misunderstanding her. In the observation deck, more instructors had gathered. The feeding behavior had become the talk of the xenobiology department. Humans were still a relatively new addition to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 generations ago. Every human behavior was scrutinized, cataloged, analyzed. Perhaps it's a dominance display by the human? Suggested Instructor Krell, whose species communicated primarily through pheromones. She has established herself as alpha, and the cubs pay tribute? Impossible, Velth countered. Krovars don't acknowledge alpha structures outside their blood family units. These cubs are unrelated to the human by every biological metric. Then what are we witnessing? Down in the habitat, Mira had begun to share her own food with the cubs in return. Not all of it, that would establish the wrong dynamic, but enough to show reciprocity. She had learned this from the wolf analogs on Kepler 442b, from the sand gliders of Proxima Centauri III. Trust wasn't about dominance or submission. It was about recognition. Recognition that you saw them, that you respected their autonomy, that you understood they had choices, and you honored those choices. Kale chirped, nudging a particularly choice piece of synthesized meat toward her plate. The smaller cub, more cautious, more observant, watched Mira's reaction carefully. Mira picked up the offering, nodded her thanks with deliberate slowness, and ate it with obvious appreciation. Both cubs' tails went rigid with pleasure, their ear analogs perking up. "She's communicating with them," Wren breathed, their form brightening with realization, "but not through any linguistic framework we recognize." "That's impossible," Velth insisted. "We've tested human communication abilities extensively. They rely heavily on verbal and written language." This is something else," Wren interrupted, which was highly unusual for the typically reserved Valorian. "Watch her movements. The deliberate pace. The eye contact, but not too much. The way she makes herself smaller, less threatening." In the habitat, Mira was now grooming the bolder cub, her fingers working through the silvery fur with gentle efficiency. The cub had pressed against her side, making a sound somewhere between a purr and a rumble. The smaller cub watched, still deciding. Our error, Wren continued, was assuming that because humans developed sophisticated verbal language, they abandoned other forms of communication. But what if they didn't? What if they retained the older languages, the ones that existed before words? Velth's mandibles stilled. Body language. Behavioral reciprocity. Pattern recognition based on emotional resonance rather than logical frameworks. Empathy, Wren said simply, not as a weakness to be overcome, but as a tool to be wielded. The observation deck fell silent as the implications settled over the gathered instructors. Humans had been evaluated on their technological capabilities, their adaptability, their stubborn persistence in the face of adversity. But this was something the galactic community hadn't fully grasped. Humans didn't just survive in alien environments. They connected with them. Down in the habitat, the smaller cub finally made its decision. It approached Mira slowly, deliberately, and placed its head under her free hand. Mira smiled, genuinely, warmly, and began grooming this cub too. Within moments, both cubs had fallen asleep against her, their breathing synchronized, completely vulnerable. In all my cycles of study, Velth said quietly, I have never seen Crovar juveniles display this level of trust with a non-parent. Never. Perhaps, Wren suggested. That's because trust was never what we were testing for. Mira, unaware of the revelation occurring in the observation deck above, simply sat with the sleeping cubs and finished her meal. Tomorrow, she knew, they would bring her food again. And she would accept it, honor it, reciprocate it. Because that's what you did when someone trusted you enough to share their plate. That's what it meant to be human. The instructors didn't understand, not yet. But they were beginning to learn.